Picture this. You pull into a gas station during a group ride. Around you, people are talking about the newest bikes, the upgraded suspension, larger displays, advanced riding modes, better brakes, more horsepower. And then there's one rider standing beside a motorcycle that has clearly been around for a while. The paint is faded. The seat has been repaired. There are scratches on the tank that no amount of polishing could completely hide. A few parts have been replaced more than once. Someone looks at the bike and jokes, "So, when are you finally going to upgrade?" The owner shrugs and says, "It still does everything I need." To everyone else, that answer might sound practical or stubborn, maybe even a little sentimental. But then the rider starts the engine and immediately notices something in the sound that nobody else hears. They know how the throttle responds when the engine is cold. They know which vibration is normal, exactly where the clutch engages, how the brakes feel in the rain, and how the bike behaves when the road suddenly tightens. At that point, you're no longer looking at someone operating an old machine. You're watching someone interact with a system they understand almost instinctively. And that raises a deeper question. When a person keeps the same motorcycle for years, are they simply refusing to move on? Or have they built a kind of trust, identity, and competence that a newer machine cannot immediately replace? From the outside, people tend to evaluate motorcycles through market logic. Newer means safer, faster, smoother, more comfortable, and more advanced. So replacing the old bike seems like the obvious next step. But outsiders see the motorcycle's age, price, and specifications. They don't see the relationship that has formed around it. After thousands of miles, familiarity becomes a type of knowledge stored not only in the mind, but in the body. The rider no longer has to consciously calculate every response. Their hands, feet, balance, and attention have adapted to the machine. They recognize small changes before a warning light appears. They adjust their body automatically in a familiar turn. They know when a sound is harmless and when it means something needs attention. Psychologists sometimes describe this as procedural learning, knowledge that develops through repetition until it becomes almost automatic. In everyday language, it means the rider doesn't just know about the motorcycle, they know it. And every successful ride reinforces something important, a sense of capability. Each repair completed, each difficult road handled, each mechanical problem solved becomes evidence that says, "I can manage this." That feeling is called self-efficacy, the belief that you can deal effectively with what is in front of you. A new motorcycle may be objectively better, but it cannot instantly provide years of accumulated confidence. In fact, it may temporarily take some of that confidence away. Imagine a rider test riding a modern bike. The engine is stronger, the electronics are impressive, the suspension is more refined. On paper, nearly everything is better, but the throttle feels unfamiliar. The brakes respond differently. The riding position changes their balance. There are settings, menus, modes, and buttons they have never used before. For a few minutes, someone who normally feels highly skilled becomes a beginner again. Then they return to their old motorcycle, place their hands on the bars, and everything makes sense. They feel at home. That return can be a mature preference. Maybe the older motorcycle genuinely fits their body, riding style, and needs better, but it can also hide something more uncomfortable. Do they prefer the old bike because it still works for them? Or because the new one makes them feel uncertain? Mastery creates confidence, but it can also make unfamiliar situations feel threatening. Once you're used to being competent, becoming inexperienced again can feel like losing part of yourself. And this is where the attachment moves beyond mechanics. A motorcycle that stays with someone for years often becomes connected to a specific chapter of life. Maybe it was purchased after their first stable job. Maybe they rode it during a painful divorce, a career change, or a period when they were rebuilding their confidence. Maybe they took it across the country with a close friend. Maybe they worked on it with a parent who is no longer alive. The motorcycle becomes a physical link between who the rider was and who they are now. Its scratches are not just damage, they are coordinates in a personal history. One mark might come from the first time the bike fell over in a driveway, another from a long road trip. A replaced mirror might recall a mistake that later became a story told for years. Selling the motorcycle can therefore feel strangely heavy. The rider is not only giving up an engine, a frame, and a title. They may feel as though they are closing access to an earlier version of themselves. Objects can help us maintain continuity. They quietly tell us that despite everything that has changed, some part of our story remains intact. This doesn't mean the rider is trapped in the past. Sometimes keeping the same motorcycle is actually an expression of freedom. Modern consumer culture constantly suggests that satisfaction should be temporary. There's always another model, another feature, another reason why what you already own is no longer enough. Some riders simply stop participating in that cycle. They can appreciate a new motorcycle without feeling the need to buy it. They may prefer to spend money on fuel, maintenance, trips, or time on the road, rather than replacing something that continues to serve them well. In this case, "I don't need anything else" doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing what enough feels like. That can be a powerful form of independence. The writer is no longer letting advertising, status, or group expectations decide what satisfaction should look like. But here's the complication. The exact same sentence can come from a completely different place. "I don't need anything else" might mean, "I'm genuinely content." Or it might mean, "I don't want to discover how uncomfortable change would make me." Familiarity can slowly become emotional protection. The old motorcycle may be the only place where the rider feels completely skilled, safe, recognizable, and in control. Any suggestion of replacement can begin to feel like a threat, not only to the machine, but to the person's identity. You can sometimes see this when the motorcycle becomes increasingly unreliable. It prevents longer trips. Repairs consume more money and energy than the rider wants to admit. Yet every conversation about alternatives creates irritation, anxiety, or endless rationalization. The rider refuses even to test another bike, not because they carefully compared the options, but because imagining something different feels disloyal. At that point, loyalty may have turned into protection. The motorcycle is no longer only being protected by the rider, it is protecting the rider from uncertainty. This doesn't make the attachment foolish or unhealthy, it simply makes it more complex. Two riders can keep the same motorcycle for 20 years for completely different reasons. One rider understands every limitation of the bike and still freely chooses it. If their circumstances changed, they could replace it without feeling that they had lost themselves. The other rider experiences every criticism of the motorcycle as a personal insult. They cannot imagine selling it without feeling guilty, disoriented, or somehow less authentic. The behavior looks identical from the outside. The difference is psychological freedom. So perhaps the most important question is not, "Why haven't you upgraded?" The better question is, could you? Could you choose something different without feeling that you had betrayed the person you used to be? Would you still keep this motorcycle if you weren't afraid of losing what it represents? Does your familiarity expand your confidence, or has it become the boundary of where you feel capable? Sometimes we believe we are attached to an object when we are actually attached to the emotional state the object gives us access to. The motorcycle may represent competence, independence, youth, survival, a relationship, a simpler time, a version of you who felt more certain about where life was going. That is often what feels impossible to replace. Back at the gas station, the old motorcycle still has faded paint. It is still slower than the newest machines around it. It still lacks the technology everyone is discussing. But now it looks different. It is no longer just a bike someone failed to replace. It may be the place where that rider stores years of trust, memory, skill, and evidence that they know who they are. Keeping it is not automatically brave, fearful, wise, or irrational. The real meaning depends on whether the connection gives the rider enough confidence to face change, or becomes the reason change feels impossible. Sometimes an old motorcycle is more than a machine that survived for years. Sometimes it is the version of yourself you are still trying to keep within reach. And if you recognize yourself or someone you ride with in this story, share your experience in the comments and subscribe for more explorations of the psychology behind the things we do.